Next up, we're going to install this Holley carburetor base. Now, why do I have a new carburetor base? Well, it's a bit of a long story, and it actually starts with something that happened when I first went to install the carburetor. Did you hear that sound? That wasn't the wrench. That was actually the sound of one of the flanges cracking. Oh, you're effing kidding me. You are kidding me. Oh my goodness. Before this, I hadn't worked much with Holley carburetors. Apparently, because the material on the base is so thin, Holleys are very susceptible to non-flat mounting surfaces. And the spacer I was using, which was made by Edelbrock and is some sort of soft resin material, even though I was going around and tightening the studs evenly, those corners must have squished enough to allow some upward flex on the center of the base, which cracked that ear. It took me a while to find a good deal on the exact base this carburetor uses, so in the meantime I kinda sorta repaired it. I bolted it down to this carburetor adapter to keep everything flat, and then I drilled a hole through both pieces and installed the steel pin to hold everything still. And then I attempted a repair with this aluminum brazing rod, which you use by getting the base material to around 700 degrees, and then you apply it just like soldering or brazing some pipes together. The trick is that 700 degrees is critical, and with the propane torch, even with everything isolated from the vise, I just couldn't get the base of the carburetor much past 500 degrees. MAP gas would have helped, or just preheating the whole thing on the barbecue or something would have helped, but because there's a spring and plastic piece on the throttle shaft of Holley carburetors, and I didn't want to go through the whole process of removing the throttle shaft, I was trying localized heat. The flange did get hot enough, and that brazing rod stuck very well to it. But even though it felt sturdy in my hand, I gave it a tap with a rubber mallet and it cracked all the way through the brazing material. I gave this another try and got everything hotter and made it even stronger, but it still wasn't enough. It still cracked off once I tapped it with the mallet. So I resorted to a bit of butchery and drilled holes through 3 more pins, anchoring through the aluminum and the brazing material that is still attached to the carb flange, and then JB welded in the pins and the corner and let everything sit with it bolted flat. I came back 2 days later and made sure everything was strong. I couldn't break it by hand and the hammer had no effect on it, and I bolted it back to the carburetor body and put it back on the car. Since I obviously don't want to use that spacer on a Holley again, I ordered another phenolic spacer. This is a solid one, which shouldn't squish and should not cause the same problems that the other spacer did. Of course, because I buy cheap eBay parts, I had to clearance the bolt holes a little bit to get everything lined up. And even then it was a little warped, but as soon as you tighten down anything, it straightened back out, so I felt okay enough about using it. So what's the deal with all these spacers? Why do I want to run one so bad? Well, there are a lot of benefits, especially in high RPM use, with having a larger intake plenum volume, but the main reason I want one is for heat insulation. A carburetor bolted to a hot intake or a very hot blower will absorb a lot of that heat, and therefore so will the fuel in it. And the cooler the fuel is, the more it will cool down the cylinders and keep them cool. This spacer is made by Edelbrock and it's about 3/8 of an inch. I don't know what the material is, but obviously it has a little bit too much squish for the Holley. This was made by I don't know who. I got this off of eBay for I think $12, and it's a very hard plastic resin sort of thing, so it definitely shouldn't squish. So it is a 1/2 inch phenolic spacer. It shouldn't squish, and it should separate the carburetor from the heat of the engine and blower. So that's when I bolted up the carburetor, checked for cracking, checked for anything, unbolted it and rebolted it on 2 or 3 times, and then all the driving and testing in the previous videos happened with the repaired base plate. It's still doing fine, and although it's a little ugly and not ideal, I think that repair is actually totally reliable. But to make myself feel better, I kept looking for cheap carburetors or cheap carburetor base plates. I eventually came across this one on eBay, claiming to be in great condition, and I won the auction for $26, which is a price that I can feel okay about. And the good news is that the seller wasn't lying. This thing is in very good shape. This actually has less throttle shaft wear than the one that was on that carburetor, and I thought that one was in good shape. So it's actually a little bit of an upgrade there, although I don't think there's going to be any noticeable difference. So everything seems really nice with it. We're just going to clean it up a little bit, and then we'll unbolt the old base plate. We'll try to match the adjustments we made to that one as closely as possible with this one, and then we'll bolt it back up and have a carburetor base plate I can feel a bit better about. We'll also take off the parts that we will not be needing. And then we'll unbolt the carburetor again, flip it over, and remove the base from there. You can see the line of the JB Weld repair right there, still intact, still seems to be holding just fine. The accelerator pump diaphragm looks like it may have been leaking a tiny bit, so I'm just going to tighten these up. They were a little bit loose, so hopefully that's all that is. Looking at them side to side, they do seem identical, and they have the same base part number, so we should be fine as long as we swap over these parts. There are three obvious differences I see. One is these throttle blade screws, so this secondary blade was probably pulled out at some point. I'm not sure why, there aren't bushings on it, and it looks like it's in good shape, so I'm not too sure there. Two, this has a stamped steel accelerator pump arm instead of the plastic one on this unit. The mounting looks identical, so I'm sure we could swap that over, but we're just going to keep this on there for now unless there's a reason to replace it. And we can swap it with it on the vehicle, so it's not a big deal. Three, this has little locating pegs for the body, and this has the holes for them, but no pegs. So we have to pull off the throttle spring unit here. Looking at the two accelerator pump brackets, it looks like they should give the same amount of gas. Now we'll see how far in the throttle blade screw is on the old one and match it on the new one. One, two. It's all the way off just before two. I'll go just a little past that. It's 2.5. And then the secondary transfer slot is just the tiniest bit exposed on this one. So, go figure. I go to move the secondary adjustment screw and the threads are damaged. It'll tighten and loosen a little bit, but it takes a lot of force and it refuses to come out. And since it's just a flathead, it's just slipping out of the screwdriver. I really must have bad Holley karma or something. I cannot seem to stop having issues with the things. So I just used the trusty old welder and welded a 1/4 inch bolt to the screw, which pulled it right out. And since the threads are messed up, I'm going to go ahead and tap it for a number 12 by 24 instead of a number 10 by 24. They're close enough in size that it should not make a big difference, and I already have a replacement screw ready to go. I actually don't like the way this number 12 screw fits in here. It's kind of loose. And even with Loctite, it might end up vibrating loose or something, so we're going to go ahead and tap this for a 1/4 inch, which means it's a little larger, which means the aluminum on the edges is a little thinner, which is a little scary, but since this doesn't really take much force, I'm hoping it'll be okay. The tapped hole isn't completely ideal since you can still see some of the old threads in there, but it's about as good as I can do. It's really not a lot better. The thread engagement is a lot better, but it's still kind of loose there. I made a grub screw, very much like the one it came with a slot both for the screwdriver and to spread out the threads a little bit and help hold it tight. I won't be installing the stop screw yet because I want to put Loctite on it and get it all tightened while tuning it, so everything definitely stays in place. Our car body does not have the slots for these roll pins, so we're gonna go try to take those out. Now, these are actually spring pins. They're not roll pins. Try not to damage them. That one came out okay. There we go. Nice and easy. I can't even pretend to be surprised by things not fitting anymore. Look at that. I guess we are changing accelerator pump arms after all. At least, that's not a big deal. Everything seems to be up pretty quickly. And we'll torque this down to 80 inch-pounds. With the base finally installed, and this time with nothing cracked, I got to go through and retune the idle. Once I was ready to tune it, I installed the secondary throttle stop screw, and it started right up and idled kind of okay, and I spent the next hour or two messing with it, but I couldn't get it dialed in quite right. I'm not too sure what's wrong. I think I just need to take more time. Two-corner idle hollies can be a little tricky to adjust, and I'm certainly not an expert at it. So I don't have it idling quite as well as it did before, but it's serviceable. And since I need the car to be ready to drive in the morning, it'll have to do. But at least the base plate is in one piece, which gives me a little bit of extra peace of mind.